Hey writers, today we're going to be looking at our drafts and thinking about some figurative language that we can add to them to make our drafts more interesting for our readers. So thinking about like interesting stories, it makes me remember my brother-in-law who can tell the most exaggerated, hilarious stories. So instead of saying, oh yeah, we went fishing, we caught the biggest fish, he would tell us, man, Caden started feeling a line on his hook and he started reeling it in slowly, crank, 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 and boom, this fish was like a walrus. He tells the most interesting stories, and that's the kind of interest that we want to have for our readers reading our own stories. So let me remind you of a couple figurative language things that we can do as writers to do just that in our own writing. All right, so when you come to your screen today in Canvas, you are going to have your independent work time, you're going to reread your writing, and then you're going to think about how can I make it more interesting. So if you need my slides later, they are right here for you, and they will open up to look just like this. All right, so figurative language in our writing. All right, so using figurative language in your writing amplifies your writing with creativity and style. So one of these forms of figurative language that we can use are similes. So similes are comparisons between two seemingly unrelated elements, and they use like or as. Okay? So my brother-in-law saying that the fish was like a walrus. Well, they're not really like a fish, a walrus, yeah, but it gives us a big idea of the size. It also highlights a common quality or characteristics both things share. So saying that the fish was the size of a walrus or like a walrus tells us just how big that fish really was. So here are some examples too. Her eyes shone like diamonds. So it's comparing her eyes to diamonds. And then he was as strong as a horse. So comparing his strength to that of a horse using as. All right? And then another one that we can use is using a metaphor. Now, metaphors and similes are pretty similar. The only difference is that this one doesn't use like or as. It simply is that thing. So this fish was a walrus. Or, like the example here, life is a roller coaster. Some more figurative language that we can use. It's my favorite, onomatopoeia, words which sound like the thing they describe. So think of your farm animals, like these examples here. Woof, ah, moo, oink, right? Imitates the sounds of things described themselves. Crash, bam, boom. And then finally, some alliteration. So alliteration is repetition of the initial consonant sounds of words. So our example is the slithering snake slid sideways silently. All right, so 4 different things that we can do in our writing to make it interesting. All right, so here are your directions for today and our goal. Our goal is I can use figurative language to make my writing more interesting. Your steps. Number 1, choose 2 different forms of figurative language to use in your writing. Step 2, write what your sentence looked like before trying out that figurative language. And then step 3, write your sentence after you use that figurative language. And finally, you're going to reflect how those forms of figurative language made your writing more interesting to your reader. All right, so let me show you an example. Here's my writing from my dad's perspective for my story about back road driving. So I love driving these peaceful, green, free-growing back roads with my girls. They seem to take away all our worries with each wide carnival-like curve. No longer are we thinking about not living in the same home, nor are we worried that I have to take them home tomorrow at 6 p.m. Right now, it's freedom, normalcy, my little girls, and this back road like our own private oasis from the world. So before I added that, like our own private oasis, it was simply, right now, it's freedom, normalcy, my little girls, and this back road. Pretty plain Jane, pretty boring. But then once I added in like our own private oasis, like our own little piece of heaven, this simile helps the reader to understand how my dad viewed those back roads we took on our way home. So it's not just a back road, not just point A to point B, but he saw it as like our own little piece of earth. All right, another change that I made to my writing using our figurative language was some fun onomatopoeia. So here's what my sentence looked like before, and then I'm going to have you listen for it with the onomatopoeia plugged in. So January was like a semi-truck on a desolate highway in the middle of the night, nothing around. Then all of a sudden, headlights before being blindsided. Okay, so that's like, there's a simile in there. It's kind of interesting, but watch and see how the onomatopoeia changes it. This summer was a good one for Danny, my little brother, to buy a boat. He and his wife are doing so well. Heck, I thought my wife and I were doing well. January was a semi-truck on a desolate highway in the middle of the night. Nothing around. Then all of a sudden, headlights before crash, being blindsided by the unpredictable force of the D word. I still cannot say divorce out loud. This winter and spring left me battered, bruised, beaten, and knocked out of my daydream I thought was our wonderful, perfect life. All right, so I wanted to highlight that crash because it really amplifies the intensity of how that winter and my parents' divorce felt for my dad. So then here, my reflection, the use of onomatopoeia here adds a hint of drama to my dad's story. I did this because it truly took him by surprise, like a car crash would. All right, so writers, this is your task for today. You are simply going to be plugging in these forms of figurative language in this little form so that we don't have to see your whole draft today. We simply want to see that you're trying these things out. So what can you do to make your writing more interesting to your reader? So all we want you to do today is we want you to think about one form of figurative language of these 4 that you can try. Tell us what your sentence looked like before, what your sentence looked like after, and then how did that figurative language make your writing more interesting to your reader? All right, so your page is going to look just like this. That's the one that you're going to be submitting, but do make sure that you are working on your draft. All right, so step 1, reread your writing. Think about how you can make it more interesting. There's my little presentation if you want those reminders. And then use the chart to think through which forms of figurative language you'll use. When you are finished, you may finish your draft. You may write for enjoyment using your backup writing, but don't forget to take a screenshot of the chart and then submit your assignment, being the chart, and then insert your screenshot into your writing notebook so you don't forget that part later, just in case something happens to it in your writing. All right, so writers, happy writing today, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with.